Good morning. I have been troubled by something I said last night. I don't think I said it well, and I don't want what I was trying to say to be misunderstood. It was when I was talking about what some authors refer to as the sin of eco-injustice, if you will, that for prosperous people, the sin is overconsumption, and for the poor, the sin is overpopulation and misuse of the land on which they live. That's the part I want to clarify. When we talk about, excuse me, when we talk about overconsumption, we make that decision. Whether that be, and I'm not just talking about food, they're not just talking about food. We're talking about water, overuse of land, electricity, the goods of earth, which is a struggle for us when we become very serious about living simple lives. What does that mean? And again, the question that we must always struggle with is, how much do we really need? All right? But when you come into the situation of the poor, their situation is not out of greed. If anything, it's out of need. In very poor countries in the world, I don't know the percentages, but pregnancies are not always brought to term. And if the child is born, there is a high infancy mortality in the nation. And if a child reaches, let's say 15, the people feel, that they're lucky. So when you think of all of that, in order for not just the family, but for the whole tribe to survive, they must have many children, because they're not sure that they will all survive. And if they don't, not just because it's the next generation, but the younger generation cares for the older generation. So it's out of need. And also, if they're used or misuse, if you will, then we know there's a tremendous amount of misuse of land. But that's because they squeeze every single possibility of life out of that land. They don't have the leisure to allow the land to lie fallow and regenerate itself. And the same thing with their herds. Have you ever seen a real healthy looking herd in a picture of extraordinarily poor people? And they drive these animals to death because they must. So it's a question of survival. Frequently, we force people into, exploitation of the natural resources in order for their survival. So it's really very, very different than it is for people who are prosperous and are overconsumers and throw away. So I just didn't want to leave. I was uncomfortable with it. If you weren't, fine, but I was. Today I want to talk a little bit about the book of Job. Almost everybody knows about Job, something about Job. They may know about the patience of Job. Let me say this about the patience of Job. The book of Job has 42 chapters. Job is patient in the first 2 chapters and the last 11 verses of chapter 42. All of the rest of that, this is an angry man. So anybody who thinks that the book of Job is about a patient man being patient, they don't know the book of Job. The book of Job, many layers. The book of Job certainly speaks about a righteous man who suffers. Now, we don't think righteous people should suffer. We don't think the good should suffer. And why not? There is, the fundamental reality of the understanding of retribution, that good should be rewarded and evil should be punished. And let's not think right now about good people or evil people, but good action and evil action. And why do we think that? Because that's how experience has shown us things work. Actions have consequences. What makes an action a good action? The consequences. That's how we judge it. If it works out well, it's a good action. We want to do it again. If it doesn't work out well, we don't want to do it again. That's bad. That's unhelpful. That's dangerous. And when I use the words good and bad, I realize that they're moral, but don't think about morality. So actions have consequences, and experience shows us we have to learn which actions have good consequences. And how do we learn that? By experience. Again, you know the adage, experience is the best teacher. I think experience is the only teacher. The only way we learn anything is through experience, either ours or someone else's. I was told when I was a child, a little child, I was fascinated by fire. I think a lot of children are. It's fascinating. I mean, adults will sit and watch a fireplace. We're fascinated by it, not simply the warmth. Fire dances. It dances, and it has color, and it changes color. But I'm told I wanted to catch it, as children reach out and try to catch what they're fascinated by. Now, I had to learn you cannot catch fire with your hands. Now, I have to learn that. How do I learn that? I can either learn it the hard way, or I can learn it from my mother's experience or my mother's wisdom. And if my mother knows you can't, say, catch fire with your hand, how does she know that? Either she tried it, her experience, or, and you go all the way back, someone had to experience that and then said, don't do it. That's what a tradition does. The tradition tells us what works. And it's all experience. So we expect from experience that certain actions will work out well, and certain actions will not. Now, the book of Job, the life of Job shows in the beginning, the first 2 chapters, Job's actions worked out well. Listen, he was blameless, upright, feared God, and turned away from evil. And as a consequence, were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. Mystical numbers. 7 is mystical, 3 is mystical, 10 is mystical. And the relationship, it's 7 sons and 3 daughters, not 7 daughters and 3 sons. And why 7 sons? 7 dowries come into the family. 3 daughters, 3 dowries go out of the family. So you're ahead by 4. There is so much economics in the Bible that we miss. All right? And 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, so many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people in the East. The East is known for its wisdom. Why? I know people who live in the East. They're no smarter than people that live in the Midwest. The East, of course, is known for its wisdom because illumination comes from the East. The sun rises. And so illumination comes from the East. It is not by accident that many traditional people bury their dead in the West, because that's where darkness is. Notice how people structure their lives around the elements of the natural world, the reality of the natural world. So all of this, Job's life is perfect. And again, my father used to tell, my father has some very interesting sayings. And I don't know about you, but when I was in fourth grade, the craze was an autograph book. And you run around getting people writing in your autograph book. Profound things like roses are red, violets are blue, and then fill in the last. So I remember when I was in fourth grade, I asked my dad to write in my autograph book. And he wrote in that something my father used to say all the time. And it was so corny, as if roses are red and violets are blue isn't corny. But when you're a fourth grader, what your parents say is frequently corny. But I remember what my father said. It's easy enough to be happy when life flows along like a song. But the one worthwhile is the one who can smile when everything goes dead wrong. Now that's not corny. After my father died, I was up in the blue room in the 475 Motherhouse. And there was in that blue room, if you remember it, a book of Wisconsin poets. And the Wisconsin poets named Wheeler, that's the last stanza of one of her poems. My father was telling poetry, reciting poetry to me, and I thought it was corny. I give you that poem because in a certain sense, it's easy when life is going well to live and be a nice person. But when life is not going well, it's extraordinarily difficult to be pleasant. So Job's life is going along like a song. All right? So it's easy for him. I don't want to minimize Job. I want us to realize, though, sometimes we read surfacely. And then the Satan. It's not Satan, it's the Satan in the Hebrew. That's not a name, that's an occupation. Sort of like a prosecuting attorney. Sort of like, the police car. We serve and protect. Because the Satan goes around, it actually identifies, goes around on earth to find out who's doing what wrong. Patrolling. All right? And besides that, the Satan is up in the council of God. So this is not an enemy. It may be a tempter, but it's not an enemy. And if anyone is tempted, it's God. Because God says, look at my boy Job. What a good man he is. And every time God speaks the name of Job, you've got that four-termed identification. Blameless, upright, fearing God, and avoiding evil. Hebrew, the language, does not have comparative and superlative like English does. So if you want to say something that is superlative, you say it 3 times. Holy, holy, holy. That means superlative. This is 4 times. It is superlatively superlative, the righteousness of Job. The storyteller wants us to see how unjust, and I put a question mark there, how inscrutable, ambiguous, how difficult it is to understand why such a man would suffer. So the Satan says, take away everything he has and he will curse you. So we know that story, and he didn't curse God. Came back again, a second temptation, touch his body and he will curse you. And he didn't. And in a certain sense, what people know about Job ends right there. But then we get to chapter 3. When Job first talks. Well, it says then, Job was sitting on the dunghill. 3 visitors came to sympathize with him, and they all sat in silence. It's a very strong Arabian, or at least ancient Arabian custom, that when you go to console people, you don't talk to them. They are the ones who break the silence. So you just sit in silence and show your support in that way. It's a very common custom. So that's what we have here. But when he opens his mouth, chapter 3, After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. This is not a happy man. Let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said, a man-child is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, or light shine on it. What is he asking for? Remember what I said about the cosmic meaning behind light and darkness. Those are cosmic terms. Cosmic terms. So he is asking that light be overcome by darkness. He is asking that evil be overcome, that goodness be overcome by evil. And cosmically, he is asking that the powers of darkness defeat the powers of goodness. He is asking that God be overturned. That's about as close to blasphemy as you can get without blasphemy. Now, I think it's very important that we realize this. And beginning then with chapter 4, if you note the structure, one visitor speaks and Job responds. The second visitor speaks and Job responds. The third visitor speaks and Job responds. And that happens 3 times. And they talk past each other because the message of each man, each visitor is fundamentally the same. You must have done something to cause God to punish you like this. And just blaming God is itself evidence of your sinfulness. Repent, repent, repent. And God will reverse. God will reverse. Now, you think about the story. Think about how we expect God is going to act in our lives. If we do the right thing, we do expect positive consequences. And if we don't get positive consequences, then we ask God to overturn whatever we are suffering from. We do that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying it's very natural. Enters a fourth person, has another speech, basically the same. Job always shakes his fist at heaven. He blames God. You have done this to me. Why have you done this to me? As I said the other day, the issue, Job's suffering, his loss, and also his illness, the afflictions of his body, are the situation out of which his real suffering springs, and that is he doesn't know why. How many times have we not heard or said in hospitals, in funeral parlors, why has God done this? What did we do? What did she do? What did he do? It all operates out of that sense that we do expect righteousness, righteous acts will result in fulfillment, happiness, positive reality. And we have terrible struggles. We get angry with God because we think it's God's responsibility to make sure that there's justice in the world, that things work out the way they should work out. That's not uncommon. So we've got to understand that's Job's struggle. And at the end of his speeches, he says to God, talk about having gall. Now come down and explain yourself. That's what Job says to God. Give an account of your actions. Now, in the ancient Near Eastern world, any reputable god would strike him dead. I mean, at least there would be a story of such behavior and God's response. You don't talk to a God like that, particularly not a God that you call almighty. But God doesn't. God comes down. The question is, what does God say? We find in chapter 38, God speaks. Now, being very simple, Job talks about justice and human suffering. Whatever he says, somehow or other, is associated with justice and human suffering. God speaks to Job. What does God talk about? Never says a word about justice. Not one word about justice. Never says a word about human suffering. Not one word about human suffering. What does God do? He questions like a good teacher. Where were you when I created the universe? Here comes the speech of God, all of which are questions about the natural world, about the universe. This is where he says, gird up your loins like a gibber. I will question you and you will declare, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. A little tongue-in-cheek there. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Question after question after question. I'm not going to read them all. You read them. It's a whole set, chapters of questions, all of which, if Job did answer the questions, he would have to say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, or I cannot control it. And when God stops questioning Job, he starts with another set of questions. And these questions are all about animals. Do you know where the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer? All questions about animals, which at this time in history, the ancients had no power over. These are not domesticated animals. In other words, animals that, talking about value, the difference between intrinsic value and instrumental value, these are animals that were useless for human beings, if you want to use that language. And yet these are animals God cared for, which means they were not useless. They had intrinsic value, even though they could not be used as instruments to further human life and enhance human life at this time in history. And once again, it's all questions. Questions which, if Job answered, would have to say, I don't know, I don't understand, I have no power over. Job answered the Lord. Now there were two sets of questions, and after each set, Job responded. These were Job's response. Job answered the Lord, see, I am of small account, an acknowledgement of human limitation. To use the language that I've been using this week, image of God, not an idol, not a God. I am of small account. What can I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. That's an ancient way of saying I should have kept my mouth shut. I have spoken once and I will not answer. Twice, but will proceed no further. I won't ask any questions anymore. Now, has God avoided Job? There are some commentators that say that God spoke right past Job. I don't think so. I don't think so at all, because Job responded. Job got the message. Job got the message. Did God change the subject? I don't know. I would say, no, I don't think so, I should say. I would say God went deeper than the questions. Again, it's a question of Who do you think you are that you should understand everything? There is so much in the natural world you do not understand and you cannot control, whether that be the cosmos, animals on earth, or human existence. And that's the lesson Job must be taught. This is not a lesson about the cosmos. This is not a lesson about the animals on earth. It's a lesson about how do human beings understand what it means to be a human being. There are things we don't understand and probably never will. I'm always uncomfortable when, we read prayers or we read some kind of devotional language, that we will know God as God is. I'm always uncomfortable with that language. As I understand our tradition, you have to be God to understand God as God is. I don't know if we ever will. Nice surprise if we will. I will be surprised. But at this point, I don't think so. That's one of Job's responses. At the end, Job has another response. This is what we find at the beginning of 42. And I think it's mystical. Job's response shows he has had a mystical experience. Then Job answered the Lord, I know that you can do all things. Job never questioned that. He knew that God was in charge. That was part of the problem. And that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Really? Are we going to overturn the universe? I'm not sure. We can louse it up. We can throw things in and it will readjust to those things. That's part of the mystery of nature. It readjusts. It may readjust into a situation in which we will not survive, but it'll readjust. It has. I know that you can do all things, that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Therefore, I have uttered what I do not understand. I don't understand why sometimes good people suffer. I don't understand that. I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me. The mystery. We are a mystery to ourselves. We are a mystery to ourselves. One might think that's not fair. But anyone who thinks that presumes we're supposed to understand everything. And who do we think we are? Things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear. That's a way of saying, I knew you from our religious tradition. We all know God from our religious tradition. But now my eye sees you. There's in the poetry, there's no indication that Job saw anything. So I think this is a metaphor, meaning I see you, meaning I understand. I used to know you through the tradition, but now I know you from experience. And I am sure we have all had moments of transcendence, profoundly mystical experiences, just moments of those kinds of insight. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Dust and ashes, of course, speaks about mortality, which is the ultimate human limitation. We're going to die. That is the ultimate human limitation. And so what we have here is a man who has been humbled. But what did Job do that he needed to be humbled? I don't think Job was humiliated. There's no indication in his responses that that's how he understood what is happening. Humbled Yes. Meaning told, look, you wouldn't understand it even if I explained it to you. I think that's what's going on here. But relative to his relationship with the rest of the natural world, which is what our concern has been this week, our relationship with the rest of the natural world. Again, this is a perfect example of somebody who had to be reminded that he is an image of God, a representative of God, not a God. You probably never hear that. I've never heard that talked about in a commentary of the book of Job. But fundamentally, it is an anthropological question. What do we really expect ourselves to do? Do we expect that we're going to do things beyond our nature? Sometimes I think so. And I don't want to say, that it's necessarily terrible pride. Sometimes it's foolishness. Foolishness. Sometimes it's pride. We're the center of the universe. Not just human beings, but the individual, the center of the universe. And people, they better know how important I am. I mean, that is a temptation that we face all the time in different ways. So that's a very, very important thing. Fundamentally, this is a book about anthropology. It's a book that says a couple of things about anthropology. One of them is, all the way through, it is our abilities are limited. Our abilities are limited. But it also says this is a man who is struggling with the limitations of being a human being, who has an experience of God. That is a profound privilege. That's why I call it a mystical experience. However, his experience of God is through. It's not direct, it is indirect. Again, as we say in philosophy, through secondary causes. He has an experience of God through nature, which every single one of us can have. And every one of us, I'm sure, has had. We may not have, been levitating above the ground. We may have been sitting on a bench and just been comforted by the weather, by the cool breeze, or the warmth of the sun, or as the other night, by the beauty of the sunset. So an experience of God through the natural world, through his understanding of the cosmos and his understanding of his animal brothers and sisters, who are cared for by God even though he is not involved in their care. Animals that survive because of God, animals who are there because of God, animals that survive because of God, not because of us, not because of him. Again, it's a book that speaks about the relationship of human beings, the place of human beings, so we can talk about interconnectedness and also interdependence. We find that in the book of Job. Those three concepts that I've been talking about that the Holy Father has in the document, those three concepts, anthropocentrism, interconnectedness, interdependence, they may not be or have been part of your everyday conversation language. But I would hope that now when you come across them anywhere, you think about certain things that we find in the document, certain things that are reflected in our religious tradition. But I haven't yet come to what I consider to be the real question in the book of Job. Everything else sets the stage. Job's loss and Job's suffering sets the stage for Job's primary question, why is this happening? And as I said, he is never told. Get ready. There are some things we will probably never understand. And the question is, can we trust a God who demonstrates universal control, who shows everything is in my hand, I am in control, realizing that we suffer because we don't understand. There's no indication that that God took away Job's suffering, and that's why he was able to say what he said. No indication. This is a suffering Job that says, I demanded answers about things I didn't understand. It's not after the suffering, it's in the midst of it. Can we trust a God who is in charge and doesn't tell us what we want to know, does not let us in on the secret? That, I think, is the issue of the book of Job. Much more than his patience, much more than his suffering, much more than the theory of retribution, which functions in our lives all the time, all the time. And it's simply a way of understanding how life works. Actions have consequences. On many different levels, we understand that. I mean, it's the basis of our penal system. It's the basis of human justice. And when we do not see that righteous actions, are appropriately, have appropriate fruition in goodness, we want to change that. Or when we see that sometimes crime does pay, sometimes it looks like the criminals get away with it. And then, last minute conversions. And it's the whole story again that that Father mentioned when it was our reading. We're not so happy when we work all day long in the heat of the sun and the one who comes the last minute gets the same pay that we do. All of those things, it doesn't feel just, it doesn't feel right. There are times when we feel that, and we expect God to live according to our understanding of justice. We probably will never understand that. And to say that God's justice is mercy is too neat. Too neat. I don't know about you, I'm not satisfied with that kind of an answer. I'm more satisfied with the answer, Dianne, you'll never understand it even if I try to explain it to you. I'm more comfortable with that than something that's too neat, simply to assuage my concern or my anxiety. So, notice he learns profound lessons about anthropology, about being a human being. He learns them from the natural world. What recently have you learned from the natural world? From the cosmos? From the weather? Not just from books, not just from conversation. All of that is certainly very important. And the natural world. The people who are sitting in this room are part of the natural world. They are the natural world. But I mean, non-human. What have you learned from the turkeys that run around in the yard? Or the deer? One thing we should learn is they're always together. They support each other. They care for each other. We could learn that. Granted, they're wired for that, and we can choose yes or no. But I think that's a valid question. It may sound strange, but that's a valid question. What about being a human being have you learned, have I learned from the natural world? Also, just how do we trust in God? I cannot believe that anyone in this room has never had to trust in God. I cannot believe that life has flowed along like a song all of your life. That just doesn't happen for anyone, right? The question is, when it goes dead wrong, how do you respond? And how do you respond, not merely, from anthropocentric point of view, but what do you expect God will do? Or do we trust that regardless of what it looks like, we are in the hand of God? We are cared for. We can be broken and beat up and bleeding and burning, but strictly speaking, we will never be destroyed. Our religious tradition tells us that. We will not be destroyed because the one who is responsible for our lives is powerful enough to hold us in care and love. That's the message of the book of Job.